everyone. I am sitting here with Tommy Hansen, retired lieutenant of Galveston County Sheriff's Office, Investigation Division. This is going to be a great interview today. We hope to bring you a lot of information about this case if you followed it. If you didn't follow it, it's going to be very interesting to a lot of you viewers that follow this type of interview. Welcome, Tommy.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Honored to be here.
If you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of your background. I've got a lot on your biography about how you started out. It shows that you were an EMT in the 70s.
Yeah, I was an EMT working part-time in the ambulance service, and got a call one night coming back from the hospital in Galveston and on a shooting, and we were like a block away, so we responded to the GPD dispatch that we'd be there. We pulled down this alley, and the guy started shooting in the ambulance. I guess he thought we was the police. So at that point in time, I realized I enjoy this world, but if I'm going to do this, I'm going to carry a gun, so I got in law enforcement.
Yeah. And you made it all the way to the EMT intermediate, special skills as it was called in those days.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. But back then, actually, that's when the EMT stuff just started. I actually went to one of the first, because before that, working on ambulances was all private. You had to have a first aid card, and that's pretty much the extent of it. But yeah, it was a good experience. It exposed me to the law enforcement world, and I think it helped make the decision of why I wanted to do what I did.
And then in 73, you became a reserve deputy?
I started out as a reserve deputy. I did that just because I wanted to see test the waters, because I had another job in the automotive industry, and I wanted to test the waters to see if this was really what I wanted to do. And about 6 months into it, I decided that this is it. So I went to work full-time for the county.
Okay. What division did you start off in?
Corrections. And times have changed in corrections, I can assure you. But I tell everybody in law enforcement, I think every law enforcement officer should spend time working in a county jail, because it is by far a learning experience of who's who and who does what and what makes those people think and how do they tick. And you get to learn all of that when you're working in the jail. May not want to make a career of it, but it's a good experience, phenomenal training. So.
Yeah, that's how I started out as well. Started out in the jail, and you learn the criminal mind, the games they play, the things that they do. So it's a good place to get your education.
Absolutely.
So when did you move up to investigation?
Well, from there I went into several uniformed positions. I went into patrol and stuff like that, and I enjoyed the hell out of that. And then Galveston County was the first agency in the country to have a mental health unit. And I was one of the second deputies or third deputies to go into that program for a little while. And then I went to fugitives in the Warrant Division. And then from there I went into major investigations, undercover work actually, for about 12 years. And but investigations, because the Warrant Division's investigations as well, probably of my 51 years of service, probably about 48 of them have been in investigations in some fashion or form.
Okay.
And supervised numerous units that were overseeing undercover operations, narcotics, auto crimes, you name it, we did it. So I've had a blessed career. I've done everything there is to do pretty much in law enforcement. So.
And you were a lieutenant commander over CID?
CID, which encompassed several other specialized units. So yes, I did that for a number of years. Right.
Okay. When you went into doing death investigations, what time period was that?
Well, when I was in the organized crime unit, that part of that division did those crimes, but I didn't do a lot of those. And then when I got past that, I went into what they now call major crimes unit or whatever. And that's when it was just one thing after another. So it pretty much started in the mid-'80s, late 80s, early 90s. Got into all of that stuff and never looked back. So.
Well,
I've worked hundreds of homicides in my career and a number of child homicides. And it has its pitfalls and it's rewarding at the same time.
You also authored some of the legislation that we have in place today.
Yes, sir. I worked vehicle crimes for a long time as well. And cars are people that, if you know me, that's my pet peeve. And auto theft was off the charts in Texas. And we were trying to figure out a way to address it. We were double, population was far less than now. We were double the amount of thefts we have now, back in the early 90s. And I was at the International Auto Theft Conference in Minneapolis, And from there, a presentation was done by the Michigan Auto Theft Prevention Authority. They were the #1 in the country the first time to do it. And they were funded through $1 off insurance policies and so on and so forth. And it was an extraordinarily successful program within just 2 years. And I thought, bingo, there it is. So I brought that back, met with our Auto Theft Association, which I had been past president of, said we want to pursue it. We did. So I authored complete legislation role modeling the Michigan program, but addressing Texas issues because we've got 900 miles of coastline and 900 miles of Mexican border, so that they don't have to deal with. So we addressed it to that, and the program is still in existence, and it's been extremely successful. And the task force in Galveston County is phenomenal. And so that's always been in fact, I just communicated with them about still going to the board meetings, because later on the governor appointed me as the chairman of the board that oversaw the authority for the whole state of Texas a number of years.
It's a lot of credentials.
Thank you.
A lot of
Yeah.
I bet your wife was glad when you retired, even though you're not fully retired.
I haven't fully retired.
You're always doing something.
Yeah. No, she knows me. She knows that's the way I roll, and I would be miserable if I wasn't working.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so.
And what blessed me with my wife, I have to say, is she was a court reporter for many years, so we shared the same world. So it made for some interesting dinner conversations, but that helped a lot because she knew, she was used to the 3 o'clock in the morning phone calls and all that stuff. So,
Yes.
I couldn't have done what I did if it wasn't for her support. So.
And when you became part of the FBI task force, what all did that entail as far as?
That was basically early on before I actually retired from full-time. I was assigned over there on doing a variety of things. And then I later becomes working over there doing strictly cold cases and cold case fugitives, of which most of the fugitive cases I worked are international fugitives. I've got cases in India, I've had cases in El Salvador, Ecuador, Mexico. I got 2 in Mexico right now, 1 in New Delhi, India right now. So that's pretty much what I've been doing for the last number of years, is working those kind of cases. The FBI office that I work out of provides resources for Chambers, Galveston, Brazoria. It was Fort Bend. They moved out to Houston, Matagorda, and Jackson counties. And so we do stuff, fugitive cases, or I do stuff for a variety of those counties. And so that's what I've been doing, and that's what I'm still doing today. So.
Okay. Well, let's dig into baby Grace, Riley Ann Sawyers. Everything that I read, she was born 3/11/2005, and she died around July 2007. So she was 2 years old.
2 years old.
Just where were you at when you get this call that this body's been found?
Myself and another investigator were over in Nederland trying to do some interviews, and it was late at night. It was like around 11 or 12 o'clock on another homicide case that we've been working from the Crystal Beach area. And we got a call about this, and Mike Berry was with me, and he was actually on call for CID. And we were sitting at a McDonald's with the chief of Nederland having a cup of coffee. And Mikey said, I got a call. And he's on the call in another booth. He got away from the table where we were. And I'm watching his facial expressions. And I told that chief, I said, there's nothing good going to come out of this phone call. And it wasn't. Mike comes back and said, we got to go. He said, a fisherman's found what's believed to be a body of a child in West Bay. And I said, let's go. So we hauled, I'll be correct here, we drove rather quickly to return back to Galveston County.
Yeah.
We met at the bait camp there by the causeway. We met with the Marine Division because they were going to go out there, and then one of the guys, the Marine Patrol, was also with the Medical Examiner's Office, so they were going to go out there and confirm this. So myself and Sergeant Berry stayed back at the bait camp, and I'll never forget this. We had just recently, prior to that, worked another case of a little boy in Jamaica Beach that was brutally tortured, and that was a horrific case. And we just kind of got over that one. And Randy comes on the radio and tells Mike and I, yes, it is what we think it is. And we both looked at each other simultaneously and said, not another one. So.
Now, you mentioned the bait camp. Was this for Bolivar Peninsula, for those that are familiar with it?
No, this was in Galveston.
It was...
The island she was found on was West Bay, over by
West Bay.
behind Tiki, past Tiki Island.
Okay.
And the bay camp is when you're coming off the causeway, just hitting the island. There's a bay camp and a marina right there to the right. And that's where we met. And that's where we launched the boat to go to the island, which is right outside of just past Tiki Island and Harbor Walk. You know where Harbor Walk is? If you went straight out in the bay from Harbor Walk, you would be on one of the islands where the fishermen found her body.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back in the day when everything happened, they kept saying it was near Bolivar, so that's why I wanted to clear that up. Because
No,
it was
wasn't
very confusing. In the water, it's in the water, but
yeah, no, it was right there in West, considered what's called commonly known as West Bay. So, and it was a blue tub, and it was like you put clothes in at the end of your bed or for a kid's room, and she was in that.
So it had a lid that folded closed.
Yeah, the fisherman lived in the area over there. Lived in Bob, is a very nice man, still around, and he did a lot of flounder fishing, which is nighttime fishing. He had a boat with the big lights on it, and he saw that thing laying up on that little island, and he said it didn't surprise him because he would always find stuff like that. It would fall off the tugboats and stuff, and he'd open up and there'd be life jackets or tools or stuff in there. And he opened that one up, and it was a smell. But then he ripped it, just tore the bag open just ever so slightly, and you saw the little pink and purple, white tennis shoe blinking in there. And that was where the games began at that point in time. So,
Wow. So at this point, it's all hands on deck. What happens?
well, the biggest thing is getting her identified, because our theory was, and I still remain with this, is if a child's a teenager and they're running the streets, God forbid, anything could happen. But when a child's that small, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, their circle of life is very, very small. And once you identify them, you're going to know who killed them. And 99% of the time, it's going to be, history repeats itself, unfortunately. It's going to be a family member. So our biggest focus was, we got to get a name to this child. And we went out to the media and we hit everything. One sad thing that came out of this case, and then one good thing that came out of it, was when you get a case like this and you start putting out information nationwide and worldwide. We actually dealt with Portugal because Madeline McCann, little girl, was missing, and they resembled each other considerably. How many cases like that there are out there? It's rather sickening. But it's beyond our control. So, but anyway, that's kind of where things do, was focus on her. The key factor in identifying her, without any question, was we had Lois Gibson. She was a forensic artist from Houston PD. Lois is phenomenal. We used her on other cases. She does age progression and all that. Because of the condition of the body and the condition of the clothing, we really couldn't put that public. But we let her look at the clothing, and then she drew the clothing. Obviously, like new, and then she drew what she thought, similar to what she thought Baby Grace would look like. We named her Baby Grace. The name, one of the girls at the county came up with that. We didn't have a name for her. Jane Doe wasn't going to work. So one of the girls at the courthouse came up with Baby Grace. And that's stuck to this very day, but a lot of people don't even know what her name is. It's Baby Grace. So anyway, that's kind of where we did. And the clothing, later on, we were getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tips coming in. It was amazing that it was such a dynamic list of things to do to try to find this, give this child a name. Her clothing, that turned out to be the biggest thing, because later on, the grandmother saw that on the news and says, "I bought those clothes for her."
So she recognized
it, and we were getting hundreds of tips. In fact, we went through the entire. Anybody in police administration will understand this. We went through the entire overtime budget for 4 divisions in the first month of the budget cycle, just working on this case.
So how many people do you have involved?
We had dozens from different divisions. A lot of them were taking the tips, and as the tips would come in, we would go follow the tips. Some of the tips came in, and if there was anything positive that came out of this case, is we would get a call, and a tip would come in and say, "Look, my daughter and I don't get along, or she's a crackhead or whatever. We've parted ways. I'm here in Louisiana, and she's supposed to be over there in Texas somewhere with our granddaughter, who's very much the same age. We understand she's maybe living in Galveston or Lamarck or Texas City or wherever. And we want to make sure that's not our granddaughter." And we would go track these people down, and sure enough, we would find them. And the mother would say, "Oh, I don't have nothing to do with it. My mother and this." And that was their family dispute. But we said, "Where's your daughter?" She's right here. So I think it was like 19 or 20 incidents where we were able to call the families back and say, "Look, your daughters are grown adults. She don't want to talk to you, but I will tell you that your daughter and your granddaughter are alive and well." Thank you very much. We had like 19 or 20 incidents. So there was some saving grace to some of this case.
Lessons learned.
Lessons learned.
Yeah. I think every case we ever had that was like that, it ended up being a training ground for a lot of us, especially doing it the first time.
Yeah, and cases like this are not totally uncommon in our area. Floater cases. Through the years we've worked many, many homicides that they weren't killed there, but they're dumped. And these people think that
Go back to Oliver.
Yeah.
It became a dumping ground.
They think that the tide's going to carry them away and the sharks are going to eat them, never to be seen again. Well, I got news, it doesn't work that way. And then we wound up with the body, and even though they were killed somewhere else, just as Riley Ann was, or Baby Grace, was killed in Houston, we really wanted to kill the body, so we wound up working the majority of the case. So it's amazing how many cases we work in this county, not just cases like children cases, but how many cases, period, because of the tourism and the ports and everything else, where the victims don't live here, and you get witnesses and they don't live here, and you get suspects and they don't live here. So they're logistical nightmare cases, and this was
Hard to start from scratch on those.
This was one of those. Yeah, sure enough. But we had media almost every day. They did the cross deal out on the island. She was adopted by pretty much everybody in the county, unofficially. Yeah.
Everybody was very touched about that.
But again, I'll go back. Lois Gibson's drawing was the deal breaker. And we didn't, in fact, the autopsy probably wasn't even completely finished yet. We already had her at the medical examiner's office starting this process because we knew that was going to be the key factor of identifying her. The quicker we get her identified, the quicker we're going to get this result. And so, again, clothing, Lois's work was phenomenal.
When you get to the point of that further down the line in the investigation, how long did y'all estimate she was in the water?
She hadn't been in the water all that long. Probably, she'd been dead for a couple of months.
Yeah.
So she was already pretty much deteriorated. But she had been in the water probably for, I think, about a month or so, a couple of weeks probably.
Wow.
Not long.
It's very surprising the way our waterways are between the ship and the traffic from the barges, and then wildlife all by itself. Even though that thing was secured, it's just amazing. Nothing.
Well, the thing about that area out there of Galveston Bay is you've got the ship channel, which they bring gigantic ships in every day. About 60% of Galveston County's water, but probably 90% of that, you can walk across it. West Bay, except for the intercoastal waterway, is only a couple of feet deep. In some places, only a foot or two deep. And so that's why a lot of things tend to float up unless they take them offshore. And even that's not a given because, like that other case that I worked with a couple of years ago, little Jacob, they dumped his body and it floated up, on the beach. So Mother Nature's tough.
Well, tell me about Mom, Kimberly Dawn Trent.
She was up north in the Cleveland areas where they lived up there. She was a young girl, very, very immature. She had a boyfriend up there, which was actually Riley Ann's father. And they kind of parted ways. And she wound up meeting her husband.
Robert Sawyer was Riley's dad.
Riley's natural father, right. And so she winds up meeting Robert.
Royce Ziegler.
Roy Ziegler, on World of Warcraft. One of those games like that. And that's how they met. And one thing led to another. The sad part about it is, and this is a kind of a learned lesson, we see this all the time where women or children are killed because of a domestic relationship, less than desirable. And so on this particular case, it was one of those where she was, I think, relatively very immature, and she wound up meeting this guy. He was as well, but he was a meal ticket for her. And she winds up coming down here and winds up staying, and one thing led to another. But he wasn't a good father, by no means, or a stepfather. by no means.
He moved in with her fairly quick, too.
They moved fairly quick, yeah. I think it was for him finding and a spouse was probably an awkward situation for him as well because he had a rather different personality. And I think for her it was a security thing. It was a military because he had a pretty good job. And so they just got together. But he was so immature that he couldn't understand a 2-year-old child. It was a 2-year-old child. They're going to run around. They're going to scream. They're going to spill milk on the table. They're going to do what kids do. And he couldn't cope with it. He couldn't cope with it. And she let him address it. And one thing led to another. But they were both completely involved with it.
Well, let's talk about the actual murder itself. You guys end up learning from Ziegler and from her. Take us through the steps.
It really broke with her when we got those tips coming in from the grandmother and all that, and everything was on the news almost continuously every day. It was a factor of getting her identified. And the mother, I think things were coming to an end, that we were making headway by watching the news every day. And I'll never forget, we got a call around Thanksgiving saying, hey, attorney's going to bring this woman in who's got some information. And it was the Friday after Thanksgiving. It was a holiday. Mike Berry and I went down to interview her. And come to find out, during the interview, she starts telling the different things about, how do you know this? Well, because that's my daughter. And it was like, okay. That changed the whole dynamics of that interview. So she was pretty cooperative, actually. I think she knew that was her only out to be cooperative. And then she kind of threw him under the bus, but then when we later got him, he really dumped it all back on her. Everything was her fault. And he kept changing his stories, and everybody we interviewed about his fellow employees and different events that were going on where it was Riley in, and he would tell you one story, and he would tell this person another story, and this person over here another story. So nothing was jiving. And then they actually told that Child Protective Services had come and got Riley in because of the ongoing, I guess, feud between her mother and the natural father.
The domestic violence.
Domestic thing up in Indiana. And so it did a terrible job of trying to cover themselves. But he actually went to the point of designing letterhead from this Child Protective Services up north with, this and that. They were making their own. A lot went into trying to make it their alibi. But fortunately for us, it didn't all work.
Now, once you guys started looking into it, you determined that letter was written by them.
Well, first off, we know for a fact, being in law enforcement, that Child Protective Services can't go over to Louisiana and pick up a child. They got to go through the Louisiana folks. Well, we knew those people up there didn't come to Texas without going through Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services didn't know anything about Riley and Sawyers. So we knew that was all bull anyway.
Okay. So, and you also were able to prove that the printer they had in their home is the one that actually
printed that
paper.
Yeah, and then we also were able to do multiple phenomenal computer searches on it to determine that he had been looking for areas possibly to bury her. And then they had some computer problems and had the Geek Squad come out there twice. And one of the guys we later interviewed said there was just an horrific smell when you walked up to the door. Because when you went into the house, it was kind of a weird design. From the street, there was a garage door, but then there was a brick wall and a gate, metal gate, and you walked through that gate, and it was like a storeroom, like for lawnmowers and stuff, on the length of the garage, and then you went into the front door. Well, that's where they had her stored, in that little storeroom, for a long time. And when the Geek Squad goes there, they're smelling. They don't know what it is, but it's some horrific smell. And that was Riley Ann's body deteriorating.
You think about the audacity of some people that think we're so smart that we'll let a computer tech come in our house to work on it, and we'll just dismiss it.
Yeah, and
it's amazing that
what's really pathetic about that is they were going by this thing every day, coming and doing their daily business, smelling their own daughter rotting away in his tub. And it was crazy. crazy. And they went through a great deal to cover it up. They went and got bleach to bleach her mouth out to get all any DNA out, but they dressed her up when they put her in the buried her basically in a tub. And
one last time addressing her.
And the mama, and this was hard. We asked her, did Riley say anything when this was going on? And the last thing Riley told her mama was, I love you, Mommy.
And just killed her anyway.
I killed her. Well, the injuries were done. She tried to they were putting her in the water, hold her underwater, been doing all kind of crap. But she tried to run away from him. He had like a belt around her and jerked her back. And she hit the back. The whole house was tile. There was no carpet anywhere. And she had a dramatic head hit. And that's what started, everything started going downhill from that point on.
So do y'all believe at the time and now that he smacked her head against the floor with his hands, swung her, pushed her off?
She tried to get away and he pulls her back. And she goes back and she hits her head on the floor.
I also read that he had put a belt around her neck and slammed her against the floor.
That's how he grabbed her and pulled her back with the belt.
That's what a horrific way to do it.
And the sad thing is that
she didn't die immediately, right?
No, she didn't. She didn't. The sad thing is the mother's there for the whole thing. She could have stopped it, but she didn't. But she was afraid she was going to lose her. She was afraid she was going to lose her meal ticket. But like here is this Madeline McCann case, and that was just a crazy case. But it was lead number 266 out of 300, almost 400 leads that helped break this case wide open.
So when he was on GPS, when he was on the computer looking for GPS locations to bury her or sites, anything that he did on the computer, where was most of that area concentrated at?
Well, it originally was in the Conroe area. In fact, he actually went up and tried to dig in a spot up there, and the ground was too hard and he couldn't do it. And apparently, I think they probably tried a few more spots and he just didn't have the ability to dig a hole. So then we found where they had researched the Galveston Bay, the Causeway area. And so that's when I think they realized the old causeway, they could go out there and traffic not going by all day, people watching them, because it's real dark over there, particularly if you go over there at night. And so they went to the old railroad causeway, and that's where they ultimately dumped her. They walked out on there a couple of 100 yards and dumped her out there.
So for those that don't know the Galveston area, we have a causeway that goes from the mainland to Galveston Island. There's a railroad trestle that runs adjacent to it. They walked out how far? Were they able to drive some of that? Or
No, you can drive out there. There's an old brick road that's actually a road. That was actually generations ago a road going on off the island. And then they built the causeways, and then they built the causeways we have now. But the roadway out there was blocked, always pretty much blocked by the railroad. And the only vehicles you'd see out there on that road would be either working on the plumbing, the water system feeding the Galveston, or the railroad people working on the tracks would be the only ones out there. So they would have had to carry her, although
it would have been odd to see somebody out there at night if an officer would have been going by.
Yeah, but the where you park to get on there, that bridge from the mainland side is extremely remote. They would have to be there for no, you would have to be there for a specific reason, and that's it. And it wasn't totally uncommon to see somebody out there at night fishing. They would walk out there and fish. Yeah. The railroad, they didn't care. So, but they were far enough away from if they tried to pull off the causeway, pull over the side of the causeway, there's traffic constant going both directions. There's no traffic there. And like I said, it's a very remote, dark area where you walk onto that railroad causeway.
So when he dropped that blue box with her in it, how far of a drop was that to the water?
Probably 12, 15 feet, not much.
So he's even lucky it didn't temp over then.
Yeah, no, yeah. And then where it was found from there, I don't know the exact distance, but it's, half a mile, something like that. So it floated around out there because that tide comes and goes out there a lot. There's a lot of tidal movement. And we did some. It was an incoming tide when that happened. We did research on that, so that would have carried it towards where it was found. And then you get out there and you got the intercoastal waterway, which the water's deeper, and there's a lot of ship or barge traffic through there.
So from where he dropped her to the intercoastal waterway going under the bridge,
Not
was
far
about
off.
a half mile, right?
At the most.
If that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That part was very surprising to me that she didn't get carried somewhere else or.
Well, it all depends on the tide. If it was outgoing tide or incoming tide. If it had been outgoing tide, it probably would have wound up over towards the Texity Dike or the back of Pelican Island area, where it was an incoming tide, and that's going to move it, go in that direction towards the west end of the island, the west end behind Tiki Island, that area over there.
So she's in the water. You guys find her. During this investigation, did Ziegler stay with Mom?
Yes.
They stayed together?
Yes. In fact, when we got her, then we wound up locating him, and we wound up running a search warrant on the house. Obviously, we did search warrants on the storage building they have. And the storage building, that's actually where Mom had told us about this. And it was some in her handwriting and some in his handwriting, where they had actually, again, this is a 2-year-old child. They had written out a list of rules for Riley. In other words, to giving her orders on what she can do and can't do. 2-year-old. And we found that notebook. I'll never forget Danny Shepard, detective, was when we were doing the storage room. He's just thumbing through this notebook, thank God, and he says, come here, guys, you'll need to see this. Sure it was.
Like a 2-year-old's going to be able to read that.
Yeah, exactly. But they had all written out. There was like 10 different things that she could do and couldn't do, and it was just sad. But she was a victim of complete and total immaturity on the part of both of those people. They weren't violent. That's why they didn't get the death penalty. They weren't violent people. They didn't have a history. The chances of them getting out and going out and killing somebody else is pretty remote. Because that was a big controversy when this later on with the court was everybody was all John Q. citizens. Well, death penalty. She killed a small child. No, but she's never had a traffic ticket. And his record was perfectly clean too. So you've got the DA, unfortunately, Kurt had to do what the law dictated he had to do. So that's when they went with life without parole.
Well, when you look at his history with her, from what I've read and what you told me, Mom seemed like she was okay with her, just didn't really know how to be a mom.
Yeah.
But Ziegler seemed like the entire time he was there, he had a plan to get rid of her. She was in the way, kind of thing.
Probably so sorry.
All the different things.
He was a dictator.
Submerging her in water,
Yeah.
covering her face up with a pillow, pushing her face down in the couch
Yes.
to where she can't breathe. These are all things building up to him.
Yeah, no,
ultimately
he was a dictator.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, his only way he could show his authority was on a 2-year-old child.
Yeah, she was in the way.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So once they know that they're being looked at by you guys, they never asked for an attorney. They never tried to.
No, when she showed up, when we first interviewed her, basically pretty much confessing to all this, she showed up with the attorney, and the attorney was cooperative. She wanted to be cooperative, and the attorney they were very, very cooperative. They had worked with the DA before we started the interview, and everybody was on the same playing field. We interviewed him. He didn't ask for an attorney right away, but he was very evasive in his interview, changed his story a couple of times, so, and then when he did say something happened, he would dump it back on.
Blame it on her.
On her, yeah.
Yeah, it's all her fault.
Yeah.
He didn't mean it. So you guys are still working a lot of overtime trying to figure out the motive for all this. And do you already know where the crime scene was at this point when you interviewed her, or did you
No,
not
we
find
did
that out
not.
till
No, we did not. We
she
found
gave it
it. After we gave it up. That was the turning point in the whole investigation. Was her showing up and being cooperative for whatever that's worth. She was very cooperative, and the attorney was. God bless him. He was, but we're dealing with a small child, and I think people look at things a little differently And I think she had enough wits about her and the attorney as well. This is just my take on it, to know that a case like this doesn't sit well with the public.
No.
So,
So the manner and cause of death were consistent with her story. And according to the autopsy, massive global
head
injury, multiple fractures, correct?
Multiple.
Not just one.
Yeah, no. She died basically a pretty much slow and probably miserable death. But I think it sounded like when the mother that she was probably ultimately went unconscious and they couldn't revive her. And then it was sad that, we had to go back and backtrack. And we got the receipts of where the shoes came from and where the clothes came from.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, that was thanks to the grandmother. She said, these came from Walmart and these came from Target. So that was again, that goes back to Lois Gibson, nailing the clothing was a very key, very, very key factor. So it was a bizarre case. It was it played on everybody. When you're working child cases, you just, I won't mention that other case we talked about.
Okay. Well, back to real quick, the Walmart list. They bought shovel, and what else did they buy?
They bought shovel, they bought bleach, they bought gloves, the garbage bags, everything that in the blue tub, tapestry tub.
Everything designed to
everything that was there to dispose of. Everything they bought was to properly, in their mind, dispose of this child's body and to cover her up. And they put her in the bag and they put her in the tub and they put bleach in her mouth because they'd read about DNA and I guess they'd been kissing her or do something, I don't know. And
that part's just bizarre.
Yeah, so they wound up doing that, try to kill any DNA that might have been in her mouth. And we wound up backtracking all of the purchases that they did for all of that stuff. So, and again, it all boils down to the mother and the clothing and the grandmother seeing it online. She thought they were down and she just happened to run across it, see a story online about baby Grace and saw their clothes.
Yeah. Well, with them both still appealing it, I guess that means he never really confessed.
No, he danced around it, but he never gave a thorough confession, which we reached a point after doing the search warrants and everything else that it wasn't necessary. We didn't need it to convict him.
Correct.
So it all worked out. It all worked out just fine. Actually, the DA's office did a phenomenal job on it. Mr. Sistrunk was the DA at the time, and he, I remember doing the closing things. He talked about the belt and everything, and then he took his belt off and whacked it on the counter, and woke the jury up for sure. But it was a tremendous amount of work by everybody involved. The different divisions, everybody was running leads, warrant division, patrol, everybody was mental health. We're all helping the CID run leads down. We'd get leads. In fact, we actually had one lead, and we still feel very strongly about it. Mike Berry and I just talked about this a while back. We did another series on this case. That there was some people seen at a boat ramp in Hitchcock going out with a blue box, looked just like this one on the bow of their boat. They didn't have any fishing gear. It was nighttime. Some other fishermen saw them. And the woman was crying. And they went out and they were gone a while. They came back, pulled the boat out. The woman was still crying. The blue box is gone. But we know for a fact, later, we knew for a fact that they weren't the ones that killed her. So we're almost wondering if they didn't find her first.
And freaked
out. And maybe one of them was wanted or something. They couldn't call the police.
Yeah.
So they took it back out there. We never were able to validate that, but we interviewed those fishermen. And the timing of the story and the location, I mean, if you come out that canal where that bay cam is and you hit West Bay, there's that island right there.
Yeah.
So that's always been one of the hidden mysteries in this case that we never could, and we had stuff all over the news, hey, please come forth if you're with these people here. And what's the chance of the boat going out with a woman crying with a little blue box on the front? Come on. But that's the way it worked out. We never could prove it.
It makes you wonder if their attorneys are going to try to use that as an out for them.
Yeah.
Even though mom's already said too much.
Yeah, but they didn't, and thankfully, and it all worked out. And the case went through the appellate process, and everything came out on the state's favor.
So there's nothing pending anymore. It's a done deal. Good. Let's talk about Harris County. And I worked a case like this where the body is killed in a certain city or a certain county and ends up somewhere else.
Yeah.
So she was killed in Harris County, but her body was found in Galveston. How did that work out with you guys?
Well, and again, as I said earlier, we work a lot of cases like that down here. I cannot tell you how many we've worked. And some of them are in that immediate area, right there where she was dumped. It's kind of a, I hate to use the old police terminology, you catch it, you skin it. You catch it, it's yours. Now, I will say that, we did a lot of work on this case, and it was all over the media every day. And Harris County did contact us and say, look, it looks like she was killed actually here. Would you all like us to take the case or no? And we had a good cooperative conversation. No, we're good, but thank you. If we need any assistance on anything else, we'll let you know.
Yeah, you guys have already put a lot of hours.
Oh yeah, thousands of man hours into the case. And Harris County was being, they were offering, being very helpful. They just, we weren't at a point where it's not time to change ships in the middle of the canal.
Yeah.
It wasn't. We were at a point where no stopping now. And it'd have been different if it had been in another state or something like that. It would involve, okay, maybe we would figure something out. In this particular circumstances, no. Harris County offered. We talked to one of their captains, called. We spoke several times actually, and we kept them in the loop. What was going on, so there wasn't any surprises in case by some legal chance the DA's offices came up with some other negotiation. Our DA's office was extremely cooperative in all of this, very cooperative. So.
That's good. It's the way it should be. Everybody working together.
No, it's a case like this. It's got to be a team. It's got to be a team effort. There's no ifs, ands, or questions about it.
I've had cases where egos got in the way and cases didn't work out the way it should have. So it's nice to hear that happen, especially on something like this.
But cases like this, I mean, they wear on you, particularly child cases. I had several of them. And it can be very harmful. Even law enforcement itself, you could have a young 20-something-year-old patrol officer that goes out and he's got two young kids at home and goes out and works a fatality wreck where a child burned to death in a car. He's got to go home with that, And I think a turning point for me in working, particularly child cases, more so than anything, and I've worked quite a few of them, was we had one where the little girl was 2.5 years old, brutally sexually assaulted. When I got the call, they were transporting her to UTMB or Life Flight. So myself and one of the DAs went out there, and we had other investigators on the scene of the location where supposedly it occurred in the Bayshore area of Galveston County. And the doctors are working on her, working feverishly, and she died. And we were sitting there, we're right here to the wall watching this happen. And the doctor started crying, beautiful child. The doctor started crying, nurses started crying, DA starts crying, I started crying. Jesus Christ. Something hit me that day, and it was a turning point to help me get through these kind of cases through the years. And I remember talking to the DA, I said, there ain't nothing in this world we could have done to prevent this from happening. But we can make it right. Let's go kick some ass. That's exactly my terms. Sorry.
No, sorry.
And we did. And we made an arrest on it. And that's another whole story for another day. But that was, for me personally, the mindset I had to not let cases like this one and other child cases that we worked, the one we mentioned in Jamaica Beach earlier and stuff, because they're all tough, but when it's kids, they can't defend themselves. It just makes it difficult. I remember after that one case, I went home that night. My wife knew what I'd been working on, and my son was a teenager, I think, at the time. And I remember going in his room and just sitting there picturing him at that age thinking, how in the hell does this happen? And I was just trying to clear my brain here. He didn't even know I was in there. He was asleep. And but it was just, child cases are something you just never can adjust to.
Well, that brings me to my next segment of questions. It's not talked about a lot. It's bad news for administrations to let not all administrations, is a lot, to not talk about the mental health of the officers that see this stuff, especially detectives that work these heinous cases where horrible sexual assaults or murder of children. When you guys were at the end of this investigation, were you all able to debrief anywhere with as a group or individually?
Yes, what we actually did is we picked a local restaurant and had a big dinner. DA's people's office, our people, everybody involved, and we all let our hair down and cried on each other's shoulders and kind of.
But as far as counseling, no, that was not done.
No,
especially in the 80s and 90s when I first got into
counseling
that was unheard of.
No, your counseling was go home and your poor wife has to listen to it.
Yeah. Well, there's so much that needs to be said about that still to this day. Hopefully, as the years go by, it gets better and better for officers.
Fortunately, this case didn't turn into a cold case like a lot of others have. And because that's a totally different animal. So.
When you work these cold cases, and I've worked a few myself, and you and I have worked a few, it's a different animal to walk up to a case jacket, open it up, and see all the work that was done, and then see no results. How do you bend your mind around saying, I'm going to take a different approach with this, especially the ones that you've helped solve? Something has to kick in to make that.
Well, you have to look at them with an open mind and realize, number one, the biggest thing that's changed, and when you're looking, let me back up a little bit. There's a difference between an old case and a cold case. Like I've got some very old calendar cases, but they've never been stopped. I've got one right now. It's 196 supplement reports, 900 and something pages of reports in one case file. That's been an ongoing case, okay? Versus a case that's sat in a box somewhere for 10 years or 15 years and you reopen it. So, the people that handle is different. What also on those cases is I like to look at them, who was interviewed and what was their statements. And then a lot of times you go through there and say, well, how come this person wasn't interviewed? We got to do that. But what I've learned on all of that, whether it's someone that was interviewed before or someone that wasn't interviewed, that they all need to be re-interviewed or interviewed, and that they're not going to know I'm coming to re-interview them until I'm standing at their front door, because I don't want them. Nowadays they can get on the computers and warp their mind. And if somebody told the truth to you 20 years ago, and I'm interviewing today, they're going to tell the exact same story if they told the truth. And the same thing, if they weren't interviewed, they're not going to know I'm coming until I'm standing at their front door, because I don't want them to get their mind warped on what's going on here, how to do certain things. And I found that's probably, and it may take 3 or 4 trips, it may take a few miles driven, but I found that's the best way. And the other thing I found also in some of these cases is you'll have an old case where you've got somebody that you know based on the reports and stuff like that, that they may have some information, but they weren't really cooperative 20 years ago. But 20 years have gone by, and now their life's changed. They got their own family, got their own kids. So, it's a different. And I had one of my cases, this guy, I knew he wasn't a witness to the crime, but I knew he could connect the dots on the players that I was looking at. I knew he could do that because he ran in that circle. So I went to interview him, and of course, unfortunately, I dealt with him before and put him in jail. And he basically made obscure gestures and told me he wasn't going to talk to me. So a number of years went by on that case. And I said, I'm going to go try again. Well, I learned he'd gotten out of jail. Then I found out he'd gotten a job, a very well-paying job. So I said, I'm going to go try again. This is when time works on your side. So I tracked him. I couldn't find where he was living, but I went back to his mama's house in Beaumont. As I walk up to the driveway, they're having a family gathering. It was his sister's graduated from some business school or something. And he saw me walking out the drive, and he come walking out there, shook my hand, and apologized. He said, I'm sorry for being such an ass to you before. He said, I wasn't a witness to crime, but I'll tell you what I know. We sat in his mama's kitchen for 2 hours.
Gave it all up to you.
Gave me everything I needed to know.
Wow.
So, you just, It takes patience, and you just got to think outside the box and let other people look. Hey, read this interview. What do you get out of this? Hey, you read it. What do you get out of this? Because we all interpret things a little differently, and so it's a little awkward sometimes.
Well, I can tell you this. So there's a lot of young people that are aspiring to be police officers now. Not as many as there used to be, and that's sad. But there's still some out there, and they're all wanting to be detectives at one point in their career. If you were to give any advice on how to be a successful detective, especially persons crimes, major crimes, what advice would that be?
I think people watch too much television, and it's not TV. It's a lot of sleepless nights. It's a lot of call outs at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. You go home, go to bed, you get called out again. I had one situation where I got called out 3 times in one night, and I'm just going to bed, and my wife said, "What are you doing up so early?" I said, "I'm going to bed for the 3rd time." So it's not what it portrays to be. And here's the difference between investigations and other jobs. If you're a patrol officer, you get called to a brutal homicide scene. When you get in that car and go out that night, you're done with that. If you're one of the forensic people and you're out there processing the crime scene, when you're done, you go back and you process the evidence. But the detectives are the ones that have to deal with the families. Oddly enough, on my way up here just tonight, I got a call from the son of one of the cases I'm working on from the 80s. And he just called to check in and called me while I'm on the way up here. And I thought, this is an omen here. But it reaches a point where it's not about you or me. When you work those kind of cases, it's about the families and the victims themselves. And I try to tell these people, if that was your daughter or your mother or your brother or your son or your father murdered, this is what happens when people don't want to cooperate. And I tell them, "Where's your daughter? Bring her out here." I said, "If that was her, what the hell would you want me to do? You'd be beating my damn door down. Now talk to me."
Yeah.
Okay. Because you all of a sudden made it real to them.
You got to make it personal.
You got to make it personal. Exactly. You got to make it personal. And wake them up. Hey, this is not about you. This is not about me. But, if that was your daughter, you'd be beating my door down. Let's solve this case. How come I haven't done it with my daughter's case? And so but you don't deal with that. Those are things that I've got cases, like some of my cases that I've worked. They're 30 years old. I'm dealing with family members, and I've watched generations come up in some of these cases, and they're still open. As sad as it may be, they're still open. And
that's like the one you and I went to Florida on just to get a DNA swab.
Yeah.
That's a long way to go for that. But
we got it, though, didn't we?
You go that extra mile and just to get a 10-second swab.
And
probably.
And on statements when you interview people, and this kind of goes back to another case that we had. Sometimes them lying to you is more valuable than them telling you the truth, because you know the truth. And I'll tell you something I've done for the years, and it's worked pretty well. If I got one of those kind of client witnesses or whatever, suspects, is I'll have a list of 10 questions, and I'll put them out there, and I said, "No, look, I got these 10 questions I want to ask you. I know the answer to 7 of them, so how you want to do this?" And it throws their whole mind, they're like, "Oh my," it's like, you tell them, they're like, "What does he know? What doesn't he know?" And it breaks their whole mindset. But it works pretty good, so it's a mind game with these people.
Columbo was one of the best about that. He'd bring in that bag and set it down and keep looking in it. And of course, the people were like, "What the hell is in that bag?"
Yeah.
And there was nothing in the bag.
Yeah. We had another case where the suspect he was right there, and he just wouldn't admit it, but we didn't need his confession. We had him, but he killed his own family members. And so I went and got the picture of the bodies, and I just threw them on his lap. I said, "That's your flesh and blood. You can't show any remorse or whatever." And he took the pictures and threw them on the floor. Perfect.
That's awesome. So overall advice to these young kids coming up: be patient.
Be patient.
Think outside the box.
Yeah.
Recanvass,
And here's the other
canvas
thing.
again, re-interview again.
Make sure before you go into any of those positions, whether it be major crimes or even especially like undercover work, is your family ready for this? Because your whole world's going to change.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be able to predict what days you're working. You're not going to be able to predict what days you're going to be off. God knows how many Christmas mornings I got called out on, on a shooting or some crazy ass shit. And so it's just a matter of your family. Make sure your family is prepared for that job. Because if you're in patrol and you're working this shift, everybody knows, hey, I work these hours, I work these days off, this or that. If you're working here, now crime scene people is similar. They get tremendous amount of call outs. In fact, sometimes more call outs than CID does. But you make sure that your family is prepared for all of that, because that's probably the deal breaker, on divorces and stuff. If you're already in this business and doing this when you get married,
They know what to
that
expect.
works. Well, that works. Yeah, exactly. That works to your advantage. But if you've been working Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years of your young marriage, and now you're working midnights off on Mondays and Tuesdays, yeah. See how that works out. So your family's, they're victims of this as well, because your call outs. God knows, I look back and I missed a lot of things with different people, and you just thank them, go on.
I'll tell you this: I've had a lot of good partners, and I've done a lot of good work. Done a lot of good work with other detectives, officers. Working with you is probably the biggest highlight of my career.
Well,
so I appreciate you coming in here to do this with me today. Talking about Baby Grace, I think it's one of the most important cases Galveston County's ever had.
Media-wise, in fact, I'll tell you something before we leave here. When we were doing one of the press conferences, it was the famous press conference where Rachel Lamonda was holding up the pink shoe, showing the media about the shoes. And there was a lady from NBC, and I can't remember her name. God, we don't know it. But anyway, I remember her coming up to me and saying, Lieutenant, she says, I cover stories all over this country. And for an area y'all size, y'all get some weird stuff down here, don't you? And I said, yes, ma'am, we do. And unfortunately, most of them aren't ours. We just inherit.
Galveston County is a weird place.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
You had that case where that guy killed that girl in Virginia, winds up in Gilchrist. How do you find Gilchrist in Virginia, And like you said, bodies floating in the bay. God knows. We had one with no arms, no head, no legs. We found out that was a story in itself. That's something that'd be a good one to interview for later. And, we had another guy that we found his body out there thanks to a helicopter pilot. And we reached the point in that particular case where we knew who killed him, where he was killed, why he was killed, everything about him, except who the hell he was. And ultimately, we finally got that point. But that was another one. It wasn't ours. It was a HPD case. It was a gang killing. So, we just inherit those through the years, and it's a challenge. But, I've been very blessed through my career that I've been allowed to just do my job, and if you got to work 10 hours overtime, then you work 10 hours overtime. If you have to work 24 hours. We kind of had an unofficial rule for a long time, years ago. We kind of called it our 36-hour rule. If we had a major case, all hands on deck, and if we have to work 36 hours straight, well, then so be it to solve it. Because if it's a hot case, you got to get on it. If it's a cold case, then you can look at it. The other disadvantage, I was going to mention this earlier on cold cases, on old cases, is the only bad thing is you may find some people that will cooperate you that wouldn't cooperate 20 years ago, but you may read the reports and say, oh, I got to find this guy. He needs to be re-interviewed. And I hate to tell you, but he died 6 months ago. So that's a pitfall of old cases too. Sometimes your people you need to talk to are no longer with us.
I had one. We arrested the brother, and we found out the other brother was involved, and we got everything ready to go get him. We found out he had just died as well. Yeah. So that was a 32-year-old homicide.
The oldest case that I worked and we cleared up was 83, a couple in the 80s, 06, 1986. But 1983 is one of the oldest ones. And but they're a challenge. I mean, and like I said, now some of the cases I'm not so much working the actual cases themselves is the fugitives that are wanted on cases from different counties, and that's enlightening because unfortunately, some of these countries, as people may find it hard to believe, aren't very cooperative.
Yeah, yeah. They either have selective memory or
They want our help, but they won't give us help.
yeah.
Yeah. I've got one case where the guy, we can't get him brought back because of the extradition treaty. And this is a country we're giving millions of dollars to. The treaty was written in 1876. 1876. Last updated in 1939, before the Second World War. So the problem is the terminology in today's world doesn't match the treaty. So we couldn't get the guy back. I actually had him at the airport. They let him go. So, it's just frustrating, but it is what it is.
Well, I hope you'll come on again and we'll talk about other cases in the future.
Yeah.
And
Enjoy the hell out of it.
I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, sir. God bless you. Appreciate you. Thanks, everybody.